You have to be strong enough to push through it, and you will succeed, because that's exactly what happened to me, and I did it, and they can too.
Welcome to Innovating Education, the podcast where we uncover the stories and strategies that are shaping the future of learning. I'm your host, Dr. Riley Williams, and today's episode is one you won't want to miss. We're joined by a true leader in education, Dr. Sandra Breece, the CEO of School Founders Academy and the visionary leader behind Telesis Center for Learning, a thriving educational institution that she started over 30 years ago. Dr. Brees has dedicated her career to helping aspiring educators build successful schools, and her passion for empowering others shines through her latest book, The Power of Community. Courage, Compassion, and Collaboration Leads to Success, which she has co-authored. Today, we'll dive into her incredible journey of founding a school, essential tips for school founders, and the impact of community-driven leadership. Plus, we'll explore the lessons that she's learned along the way and how she's helping the next generation of educators make their dreams a reality. Dr. Brees, welcome to Innovating Education.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm excited about this, and I will do my very, very best to enlighten your listeners.
Well, Dr. Brees, starting a school is no small feat by any means, but sustaining and growing it for more than 30 years, that's extraordinary. So I'd like to go back to the beginning. What inspired you to start Telesis Center for Learning?
Motherhood. Motherhood inspired me. I had to have one son, and 30 years ago he was just a kid, and he needed help through the very profession that I have inspired to do for almost 50 years now. It's been a long time, but I'm only 39. You know how that works, right? It's true that all that time that I've spent, I feel like I want my own son to aspire to be the best that he can be in my profession, not to be a teacher, but to be a good student, because all teachers start out being good students, right? That's exactly what we want to do. So he was having difficulty, and he, as a third grader, and I promised myself, after trying many, many things with my colleagues and professionals that knew as much as I did about how schools are supposed to work, I wanted my own son to be successful. So I made a promise to myself that by the time he was a seventh grader, I would do something different to enhance his education or provide him an opportunity that I didn't know of at that time. And I never dreamed it would be a starting a school. I never dreamed that at that time. I just knew I wanted to make something different happen. And I gave myself 3 years to think about it. Now, I would never do that today. I would never say to you or to someone else, if you want to start a school, take 3 years off and think about it. No, no, no. But that's what I did, because I didn't have anyone to speak to about it other than my colleagues and my professionals at my school. And that's what I did. But I kept it kind of to myself, trying to decide what would be the right thing to do. And so by 3 years later, I knew that something different big had to change. And my son is a kinesthetic learner. And for your viewers that might not know, kinesthetic learners are students that learn with their hands. They learn best with doing things, projects. In the act of doing is how they learn. And the others that are a much larger population, visual learners, auditory learners, they're out there too. But it's the kinesthetic learner that gets lost in the classroom oftentimes. And because teachers are, most of them are visual learners. Some of them are auditory learners, but very few are kinesthetic learners. And so, for that reason, it's difficult for a teacher to embrace the kinesthetic learners in their classroom. And it's oftentimes the child that is teased or bullied. Oftentimes, they stand out and they don't fit in. That's where I found myself with my son who's a wonderful kinesthetic learner. He still is a kinesthetic learner as an adult. He still is into doing projects and learning as he's doing it, on the job kind of learning kind of thing. And he's very good at it. So, and ironically, he's grown up to be my technology coordinator and support system, which is I credit him for making so many technological decisions for my school as it grew, because he really is good at that, and he trained himself because he's a kinesthetic learner. That's what they do best. So anyway, that's what motivated me 30 plus years ago to start a school. And at the time I wanted it to be just a school for kinesthetic learners. That's what I wanted it to be. Other kids like him that were struggling, and unnecessarily, because they needed someone to help them learn the way they learn best, with their hands. So that's what I set out to do. And I put a little tiny ad in the newspaper, our local newspaper, excuse me, a little ad, and that ad reached out anonymously, because I was working for the school district, so I didn't want to set off any panic alarms at all. And so I put a little ad in the paper asking if any other mothers out there of middle schoolers had students that were having difficulty. And I put my phone number anonymously in the newspaper, and I got phone calls from parents that had similar situations as I. And when I spoke to them on the phone, I asked them questions involving their child and how their child learned best. And if I determined by those initial questions that they probably have a kinesthetic learner, without confusing them, I said, we need to meet because I think I've got a solution that can help you. And then I told them about my idea, my plan to start a school for kinesthetic learners. And that's how I built my first classroom of only 9 students, and a community of their parents that believed in it as much as I did after I convinced them that this was the way to help a kinesthetic learner. And that's how I started. And that was in 1991 when I opened that school, a private school, because that was the only way in Arizona to open a school other than a public school, a public, traditional public school. Charter schools hadn't started yet. That was way before, a good 4+ years before they ever started, even back east. And I was way out west. So it was a wonderful thing. And that's how I started, to answer your question, with that class of 9 students.
Well, Ellis's Center for Learning is now home to 2 tuition-free public charter schools and a thriving preschool. So, what do you think has been the key to your school's long-term success?
Well, first of all, I had to be flexible. One thing I tell people that are interested in starting a school, or passionate about starting, and I should use that word more often because that's what it takes, is passion. And those that are passionate about starting a school, they have to remember that they are going to bump into things that they probably don't know are out there. For example, I wanted to help kinesthetic learners, but I soon found out, just a short year later, after 1 year of operation with my first initial class of 9 students, that there were others that wanted that help too. And I had parents of visual learners, parents of auditory learners, who called me and said, I want my child in your school. I've heard such good things about it. And then when I asked a few questions, I found out that they were very passionate about having their kid in our school. However, they didn't fit the paradigm that I had made the gateway to get into the school. And so I had to wrestle with that, because remember, I spent 3 years planning it and preparing for it for kinesthetic learners. So I had to be flexible. I had to teach myself that just because my passion was kinesthetic learners, I had to include others and modify my plan so that it can grow. And luckily, I convinced myself that's what I needed to do, and I did it. And I remodeled my plan, went back to the drawing board and tweaked it so that it would include visual and auditory learners so that I could let those students come into our school so it could grow. And that's what I did, and it began. And at the time when I first started, I called my school Hands On Learning. Well, that was appropriate, but we would have to change the name because we were no longer addressing just the needs of hands-on learners, but the needs of visual and auditory learners as well. So that's what I did, and the name was suggested by one of the parents of my community, the parents of one of my students, those 9 students, and they suggested Telesis. And I said, Telesis, what's that mean? And he says, I'm not sure. It's in the dictionary. Look it up. I don't know, but it's a really good word, and it's so marketable, he told me. I'll never forget him saying that. So marketable. So I looked it up, and by golly, he was right. It was in the dictionary, but I saw that it wasn't pronounced telesis. He was mispronouncing it. It was telesis. So I found that out, and then I read the definition that it was derived from Greek, and it not only derived from Greek, but it had a very definite meaning of planned progress, which is exactly what we do at our school. So then it was easy to convince myself, I can do this. This is flexibility. I can do this. And so I changed the name from hands-on learning to Telesis, pronounced correctly, Telesis Preparatory Academy, and that's what our name is still today, helping students of all learning modalities, kinesthetic, but also visual and auditory learners are at our school and doing well, thriving and surviving. And that's why we were able to grow and get bigger and have had thousands of students cross through our doors and graduate, because we're kindergarten through 12th grade, as you said earlier in the introduction. And we just added a preschool 5 years ago, and it's doing well too. That's the story. True.
I completely agree. Flexibility is so important in leadership.
Oh, yeah.
So many of our listeners are educators or administrators who have dreamed of starting their own school. You've spent years mentoring school founders through your School Founders Academy. What's the first step that someone should take when founding a new school?
So glad you asked, because that's very important. And that's the first thing I do when I have a new client that wants to start a school and is passionate about it, is that passion that they have to be really clear. That is what's going to be their driving force. In other words, the first obstacle they meet, and they will meet with some obstacles. So that first obstacle, they don't want to roll over and play dead and say, oh, I can't do this. You've got to be determined and to push through it. And one of the factors that come up first, almost in every situation, are naysayers. They're people that are mean well, they're good friends, usually very close friends. And to your surprise, they're like talking you out of it. So they're like, oh my goodness, what can we do? And so I tell them, you have to have passion that's so strong you can push through that. And that's what I teach them first, is to have that passion strong and in place so that when they meet up with those naysayers, they can push through it and not change their mind or put it on the back burner and forget about it. You have to be strong enough to push through it, and you will succeed, because that's exactly what happened to me, and I did it, and they can too.
Starting a school is a very ambitious goal, and it's easy to focus on the big picture. But what are some of the day to day realities that new founders often underestimate?
Goodness, I have a long list of stories that I could tell you. Let me see which one would be the best one to tell you, because there's so many. The problems will come up. For example, when we wanted to expand, our first expansion from my little beginning class of those kinesthetic learners, and then when I changed the name and changed the focus to include auditory and visual learners, and had more students come in, I needed to expand my school. We started in a little room downstairs in my 2-story duplex. That's one classroom. very soon, like the very next year, we needed to expand to the upstairs of the duplex, the to find more places to put a school. I had to move out because I lived upstairs. I had to move out to make that happen. So I had to talk to the fire department in my community. And I talked to the fire department explaining what I wanted to do. And they sent the fire inspector out and to make sure that it would be everything would be okay. And that this was like 2 months our before our third year of operation, 2 months before the school year was to begin. He came out and he looked things over and he said, I told him what our plan was and where we were going to put these classrooms, and he approved it. And it was so much easier than I thought it would be. So I was happy. I hired more teachers. I brought in more students, enrolled more students, visual and auditory learners as well as kinesthetic, and brought in those students and began to get ready with my teaching staff. And 10 days, just 10 days before the school year was to begin, that third year, the fire chief called me. And I knew him. I didn't know the new fire inspector they had that approved my plan. And the fire chief called and he apologized. He apologized to me. He says, we have this new fire inspector and he made a mistake. And I'm so sorry, Sandy. He told me, I feel really badly about this, but you're not going to be able to open until you put not one, but two fire escapes off that second floor. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's going to a tall order. But I hung up the phone and I thought about it. What am I going to do? 10 days. I've got these new teachers. They've all signed contracts. I've got new students coming in. I've got to figure something out. So I made an executive guess. That's what it was, an executive guess. Maybe if I call someone privately and share my dilemma, someone that could advise me. So I called my good friend Steve, who was a general contractor in our community and a good friend. And I shared my dilemma that I had just gotten the call from the fire chief. This is my problem. I won't be able to open in 10 days. I need two fire escapes. Can you think of anything I can do to make this better? And he listened quietly, which his quietness kind of scared me. I thought he doesn't have any idea either. But then he said, let me make some phone calls and I'll call you back. That's what he said. And that's what he did. He took the initiative to find out from a architect that was new to town that I didn't know, that he knew, and to find out if he could count on that architect to approve the blueprints right away so he could get the permit from the city to build those two fire escapes. And then he asked his partner to partner with him in building them fast, day and night, so we could be ready to open in 10 days. And by golly, he did it. He called me back, told me his plan. I said, absolutely, yes, yes. And I watched it all come unfold. It was amazing. He got the permit the very next Monday, and they went to work. And in 7 days, they built two fire escapes all out of the second story floor of my duplex, so that we could have classrooms up there and launch our plan as we expected. And on the opening day of the third year, my parents and students were waiting outside, wondering if school was going to open or not. While I met with the fire department, the fire chief, and that fire inspector that had made the mistake, and he was apologetic too. And they gave me the full stamp of approval on two up to code fire escapes that were all in place, thanks to my friend Steve. And it worked. And they went out the back door, out the fire escape, while the students came in the front door. And the first day of school came off as planned. And I'm so grateful to my community for supporting me in that endeavor. And it would have never happened if I had listened to those naysayers or listened to the doubts in my mind that I might not be able to do this, because it was pushing forward and being passionate about my decision to make this work that is the reason that it worked.
So the two main themes that I'm hearing from you is having flexibility and then also resilience. But
So
one Sorry.
Oh, that's so true. I just want to tell you, you're right on the mark. I'm glad that I'm able to impart it to you and your listeners in a way that they understand it, because a lot of things were happening all at the same time. There's many moving parts to starting a school, like you said. It's a complicated process.
Well, one theme that also stands out in your work is community, and that's the focus of your new book. Can
Yes.
you tell us more about this book and why did you choose to write about the role of community in school success?
Well, I'm very lucky because that kind of happened by accident. I happened to meet up with some business entrepreneurs, and they were had the idea of writing a book in collaboration with each other about our communities. And I said, "Whoa, count me in! I've got a community that like no other, because they didn't know my story." And so I shared my story, and they agreed, "Yes, you need to be a part of this." So there's 9 of us total that wrote The Power of Community. Each chapter is different. My chapter is the only chapter that's about school building, but it's all about community. Every chapter is about their community and how it enabled them to do whatever their business is. They're all different business leaders in different ways, different components of business, and they describe it very well. And my chapter is unique. It's chapter number 3, and it's all about compassion and collaboration and how that is so much better, and makes it so much better to be able to be compassionate and collaborate with your community individually. Sometimes you just have to handpick those community members that you're going to work with. And that's what I began to do, and realize that telling the world isn't what I want to do. Sharing it one person at a time is how I want to help people. And so now I'm in a position that I can help others do the same thing.
You've spent over 30 years in education and you've shared about the difficulties in starting your own school, but I imagine that you've had many tough lessons along the way. Can you share the 3 most important lessons that you've learned as a school founder, and how have these lessons shape not only you as a school founder, but as a leader and a mentor to other educators?
Sure, of course. Yes, about 20 years ago, I was in need of a science teacher. We were getting ready to expand our school from the elementary level to include high school. So we had already added middle school. We wanted to add high school. And so we were getting ready to do that. And I couldn't find a science teacher. It was at the very beginning of the teacher shortage, which is worse today, and as you know, and the teacher shortage impacted my effort in finding a science teacher. I couldn't find one in my community, and so I went outside to the rest of Arizona to look for a science teacher, and I found teachers that were willing to come, but either couldn't afford to, or couldn't find a place to live, or they had other complications in their own lives that made it impossible to take the job. So then I went to other states, and I had difficulty. Finally, one of my good community members, one of my parents and one of my students suggested, "Have you ever thought of trying an agency, a scouting agency to look for?" And no, I hadn't thought of that. I mean, they suggested ideas all the time, and things that I could do to make things better. So that collaboration is so important. And so I said, "Thank you very much." And I contacted an agency that looked for educators, and they looked all over the world for educators. And they happened to have a, a tape. Back in the old days of the old CDs, they had a CD of interviews that they had done with teachers in India. Well, that was just like, whoa, I couldn't even wrap my head around that one, but I was silent and listened, because I still needed a science teacher, whether I approved of this idea or not. And again, that calls on flexibility. I had to be flexible to open up my mind to address this problem in a different way. And so they sent me the CD. I watched it, and I picked out one teacher of all the interviews of science teachers they had, and that I felt was, first of all, she had a very calm and warm demeanor. I liked that right away. and she spoke perfect English. Her English was so superior. And I thought, if she's going to come here, she's going to be teaching American children who need to be able to understand her, especially in the area of science. So I definitely wanted that to happen. So I selected her, but I still was very skeptical. I thought, I don't know how this is going to work, but I'm going to follow it through. And I had faith that somehow this might lead to an answer. So they connected me to her. And I remember this is 20 years ago, a little more than 20 years ago now. 20 years ago, no cell phones. I mean, they connected us on a scratchy international telephone line. And if you've ever talked on one of those long ago, probably you haven't. You're too young. It was so awful. Our connection was bad. She told me later that she could hardly hear me, and I told her I could hardly hear you. But it just felt right. In my gut, it just felt right. So I hired her right then and there on the spot. She arrived at Telesis on the first day of our orientation in her full sari, her native outfit, her native costume of her country. And I had told my teachers that we're having a new member join our staff, and I explained the situation, and I taught them how to say, "Welcome to America, welcome to Telesis," in Hindi, her native tongue. And when we said that to her when she arrived, she tears rolled down her cheeks and she started to cry. And I said, "Oh, did I make you sad?" And she says, "No, I'm just so happy." Those were happy tears. And she was so happy to be there. And she had left her family behind because she didn't know if this was going to work for her or not. Her husband, an accountant, her two daughters, one a third grader, one a fifth grader, stayed behind. The next year, after she successfully went through a full year doing a wonderful job at teaching science to our middle schoolers and high schoolers that we had just added. So to do that was amazing. But that wasn't enough. She brought her family the next year to Lake Havasu, where I live, and her third grader and her fifth grader joined our school as students, and they grew up. 13 years later, they became valedictorians of their classes when they graduated from Telesis. And one is a medical doctor today, and the other one is a software engineer for General Motors in Minnesota. So it's so exciting, and it all worked out so perfectly. And here's the real kicker: she has become our dean of students. So it's all a good picture for everything. And here's what else that you need to know that I consider in the category of miracle. She told me that when she submitted her application to the agency that helped me find her, when she submitted her application, it was to be a math teacher. They made a clerical error in their office and accidentally put her with the science teachers. If that clerical error hadn't happened, our paths would have never crossed. I would have never met her. What a blessing that was. It really was. That was a miracle, in my opinion. So she's still at our school today, and as dean of students and our testing coordinator, and has so much to do with students' progress and teachers' progress at helping them to be successful. Those are the kind of obstacles that can happen, and how you can fix them as you continue to grow with your school. Just because you open the doors at the very beginning doesn't mean that it's all done. You have to keep helping and finding ways to make it work. And that's what the Power of Community book and my chapter is specifically about: schools. It's all about that.
So, if someone listening right now is on the fence about starting a school, what would you say to them?
Don't wait 3 years like I did. Don't wait 3 years. Start right away. Call me. I started out with very definite plans, and with a dash of flexibility, I was able to modify it so that it would work. And I can help with that dash of flexibility if they're willing to hear what kind of flexibility is necessary in their situation. It depends on the state and where they live and what kind of school they want, and we can work it out together.
That is amazing. I actually feel very encouraged and supported just talking with you.
You.
So, before we wrap up, how can our listeners connect with you and learn more about School Founders?
I have a monthly workshop. They can come to that workshop and hear in more detail about the stories I just shared with you. They can also sign up for a personal, absolutely free of charge. All this is just available, but just for the asking. They can come and we can talk privately together on with Zoom helping us. No matter where they live, I can help them right away in helping them analyze their plans. And then we can put a program forward. I have a 7-week curriculum program, all planned and ready for anyone who's ready to start any school of any kind, anywhere. So I'm putting the ball in their court. All they have to do is throw it back to me. Just throw that ball right back, and we can begin to start to plan and to prepare them for an adventure that is like no other. I can tell you, having lived through it, it is very doable. It's very possible if you have the faith in yourself and in your plan of passionately starting a school that will work in your community. And I can help with the details. That's what I would like to do, and that's what I have done best. And yes, I made some wrong decisions along the way, but I made a lot of right decisions along the way too. And I can share the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of that, so that they are prepared and don't have to do it alone.
Dr. Breeze, thank you so much for joining us today. So, for our listeners, if today's episode resonated with you, please be sure to subscribe to Innovating Education so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed our conversation, please leave us a review and share it with fellow educators and change makers. And for those of you ready to dive into Dr. Breeze's book, make sure to grab a copy of The Power of Community on Amazon. I've linked it in the comments. So, until next time, keep innovating.
Thank you, Riley. Thank you so much.